it's a beautiful night.
She had stood among one of South Korea's wealthiest and most influential families. The discovery didn't answer the questions surrounding her. It multiplied them. Why had she vanished from that world? Why had she returned under a different identity? And why had someone worked so hard to erase every trace of her connection to one of the country's most powerful business dynasties? While corporate investigators continued searching for answers, Ava quietly carried on with her work as though nothing had changed. She attended meetings, advised international partners, and remained the same composed woman Adrian Kensington had first underestimated at the gala. But beneath that calm exterior lived memories she had spent years learning to control. Memories that explained why hearing the words, "She's beautiful, just not my type," had never truly hurt her. Compared to everything she had already endured, those words were insignificant. More than 20 years earlier, Ava had lived a life that looked completely different. Her father, Daniel Mitchell, was an American financial investigator hired by multinational corporations to uncover hidden corruption inside complex international partnerships. He believed that business could only survive when honesty carried more value than influence. It was a belief that earned him respect from some people and powerful enemies from others. During one investigation involving several international conglomerates operating across Asia, Daniel uncovered evidence suggesting that millions of dollars had quietly disappeared through fraudulent contracts, shell companies, and manipulated investment agreements. The deeper he investigated, the more disturbing the pattern became. Powerful executives were enriching themselves while ordinary employees lost their jobs. Honest investors lost their savings, and family-owned businesses quietly collapsed without ever understanding why. Daniel refused to remain silent. He gathered documents, financial records, confidential communications, and witness statements, preparing to expose everything through legal authorities. Friends warned him to stop. Colleagues advised him to walk away while he still could. Even members of his own legal team admitted the people involved possessed extraordinary influence. Daniel listened to every warning. Then he continued anyway. The consequences arrived faster than anyone expected. Contracts were canceled overnight. Clients suddenly withdrew from long-standing agreements. Anonymous accusations questioned Daniel's credibility. Banks unexpectedly refused financing for projects that had already been approved. Within months, the successful consulting firm he had spent years building began collapsing under pressure created by people determined to silence him without ever appearing responsible. The financial losses became overwhelming. Lawsuits followed. Friends disappeared. Business partners stopped returning calls. The people Daniel had trusted most quietly distanced themselves, unwilling to risk their own futures. Watching her father lose everything changed Ava forever. She was still a teenager, yet she learned a lesson that no classroom could ever teach. The most dangerous battles were often fought without raised voices, without weapons, and without headlines. They were fought through influence, reputation, and patience. Meanwhile, Adrian Kensington continued reviewing the confidential reports his investigators had assembled. Every new document challenged the rumors spreading across the business community. Instead of exposing deception by Ava, the evidence painted the picture of a woman whose life had been shaped by extraordinary loss and relentless determination. But one final report stopped Adrian cold. It contained archived board meeting minutes from nearly 23 years earlier, along with handwritten notes recovered from a corporate legal investigation. At first, the names meant nothing. Then his eyes settled on one signature. His expression changed instantly. He recognized it without hesitation. It belonged to someone from his own family's inner circle. Someone his late father had trusted completely. Someone who had helped shape Kensington Global into one of the most respected companies in the country. According to the documents, that trusted advisor had attended private meetings connected to the very investigation that destroyed Daniel Mitchell's career. Adrian read the pages again, hoping he had misunderstood. But the evidence refused to change. If the records were authentic, then the tragedy that had driven Ava out of South Korea wasn't caused by strangers alone. Someone connected to the Kensington family had played a role in betraying hers. And for the first time in his life, Adrian was forced to confront a possibility he never imagined. The greatest threat to the future of his family might not be standing outside the company at all. It might have been sitting beside them for decades. The evidence resting on Adrian Kensington's desk refused to leave his thoughts. For nearly a week, he read every report his investigators delivered, hoping one overlooked detail would prove the documents wrong. Instead, each new file strengthened the same disturbing conclusion. The rumors surrounding Ava Mitchell had been manufactured. The attacks against her reputation had been carefully coordinated. And somewhere inside his own family's corporate empire was someone connected to the chain of events that had destroyed Daniel Mitchell's career more than 2 decades earlier. Adrian had spent his entire life believing Kensington Global represented integrity, discipline, and honor. His father had built the company on those principles, reminding him from childhood that a family's reputation could take generations to build and only moments to destroy. Yet the records now sitting before him suggested someone had been quietly exploiting that reputation for years without anyone noticing. What unsettled Adrian even more was the realization that Ava had never once accused him, his family, or the company of wrongdoing. She could have confronted him the night of the gala after hearing him dismiss her with the words, "She's beautiful, just not my type." She could have publicly exposed the investigation into her past. She could have answered every rumor with the truth. Instead, she remained focused on something much larger than personal revenge. As Adrian wrestled with those discoveries, pressure inside the Kensington family reached a level he had never experienced before. The board wanted immediate answers about the anonymous stories circulating online. Investors questioned whether Ava Mitchell's growing influence around Kensington executives might damage the company's international reputation. Several family members privately advised Adrian to distance himself from her before the controversy affected pending business agreements. Others believed she had entered their lives with hidden motives and warned him not to underestimate her intelligence. Every conversation seemed to end with the same suggestion: cut ties with her now. Adrian listened carefully but gave no answer. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning advice that he normally would have accepted without hesitation. Meanwhile, Ava continued exactly as she always had. She attended meetings, coordinated international negotiations, and quietly resolved problems before they became public crises. She never complained about the rumors, never responded to anonymous accusations, and never asked Adrian to defend her. That silence fascinated him. Most people fought desperately to protect their reputation. Ava protected her work instead. Every successful negotiation, every solved problem, and every executive who left impressed by her professionalism slowly became her response to those trying to destroy her credibility. Watching her from across conference rooms and board meetings, Adrian realized something he had failed to understand at the gala. Confidence built on truth rarely needs to announce itself. Then another unexpected challenge arrived. Kensington Global was preparing to finalize its largest international partnership in company history, an agreement worth billions that would reshape the future of the business. But one of the partnering families insisted on a condition before signing. Adrian should announce an engagement to Sophia Hahn, the daughter of the chairman of Honridge Group. On the surface, it sounded like a celebration of two powerful families joining forces. In reality, it was a strategic alliance designed to strengthen corporate influence across Asia. Adrian understood exactly what it meant. If he accepted, shareholders would celebrate, investors would applaud, and his family would finally have the marriage they had wanted for years. If he refused, the partnership itself could collapse. The proposal divided everyone around him. His mother urged him to think about the future of the company rather than his personal feelings. Board members argued that great leaders sometimes sacrificed private happiness for public responsibility. Financial analysts warned that rejecting the alliance could cost billions in market value. Adrian had faced difficult business decisions before, but none had ever felt this personal. Every argument sounded logical. Every consequence seemed unavoidable. During those same days, Ava uncovered another piece of evidence connected to Daniel Mitchell's investigation. Hidden within archived financial records was proof that funds had been transferred through companies connected not only to rival business groups, but also to advisors who had once worked alongside trusted members of the Kensington organization. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Daniel Mitchell hadn't simply uncovered corruption. He had come dangerously close to exposing an international network powerful enough to manipulate governments, corporations, and financial institutions. His downfall had protected people whose influence extended far beyond a single company. Ava finally understood why someone had spent years erasing records. changing identities, and spreading rumors whenever old questions resurfaced. She wasn't chasing history anymore. History had caught up with everyone involved. Late one evening, Adrian requested a private meeting with Ava inside Kensington Global's executive headquarters. There were no board members present, no attorneys, no advisors, and no cameras documenting the conversation. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Adrian looked at her with a sincerity she had never seen before. "I owe you an apology," he finally said. "Not just for what I said at the gala. I judged you before I knew anything about you. And now I'm beginning to realize that the people I trusted most may have been hiding the truth from me for years." Ava listened quietly before answering. "An apology changes the past for neither of us. What matters now is what you choose to do next." Her words lingered in the silence between them. She wasn't asking him to choose her. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was asking whether he would choose the truth, even if it meant confronting people he had trusted his entire life. As Adrian watched her leave the office that evening, he realized the decision before him had never been about romance alone. It was about loyalty, justice, and the price of protecting a legacy built on incomplete truths. Outside the building, reporters continued speculating about his future marriage, unaware that the greatest battle was taking place behind closed doors. And just when Adrian believed he finally understood the choices ahead, his chief legal advisor entered the office carrying a sealed envelope marked confidential. Inside was an official announcement that stunned him. His family had already begun arranging an engagement ceremony without his approval, and the date had been set for the very same week Ava planned to present the evidence that could expose one of the largest corporate conspiracies in South Korean history. The announcement arrived without warning, and within minutes it dominated every business newsroom, entertainment program, and financial publication across South Korea. What began as an ordinary Monday morning quickly transformed into one of the most talked-about stories in the country. Kensington Global released a brief statement confirming that its chairman and billionaire heir, Adrian Kensington, would hold a private press conference later that week regarding both the future leadership of the company and a personal announcement that had already sparked intense speculation. Investors immediately assumed the news involved another international acquisition. Political analysts expected a strategic partnership. Social media, however, had reached a different conclusion. Rumors spread that Adrian had finally agreed to the arranged marriage his family had pursued for years. Commentators confidently predicted the bride would come from one of Korea's most influential business dynasties. Every major television network began reviewing the names of wealthy heiresses who had appeared beside Adrian at public events over the previous decade. Not a single person mentioned Ava Mitchell. To the public, she remained the mysterious American woman surrounded by unanswered questions, anonymous accusations, and carefully manufactured rumors. No one imagined she was about to become the center of the biggest society story of the year. Inside Kensington Global headquarters, the atmosphere could not have been more different. Adrian had made a decision that stunned even those closest to him. After weeks of reviewing evidence, confronting painful truths about his family's past, and witnessing Ava's unwavering integrity under relentless public scrutiny, he refused to allow others to determine the course of his future. The arranged marriage proposed by powerful shareholders had never been about love. It had been about influence, appearances, and preserving alliances that benefited everyone except the people expected to live with the consequences. Adrian quietly informed his parents that he would not proceed with the engagement they had arranged. The conversation became one of the most difficult of his life. His mother pleaded with him to reconsider, warning that rejecting the alliance could fracture decades of carefully maintained relationships between Korea's most influential business families. Senior advisors echoed the same concern, reminding him of the financial risks attached to his decision. Adrian listened respectfully before answering with a calm certainty none of them had seen before. "For years I believed strength meant making decisions without emotion," he said. "Now I understand that real strength is choosing what is right even when it costs you everything." Those words marked the first time he openly challenged expectations that had shaped his entire life. 3 days later, the country's largest conference hall filled with journalists from around the world. Television cameras lined every aisle. Financial correspondents prepared live broadcasts. Photographers waited behind velvet barriers, convinced they were about to witness another carefully managed corporate announcement. Adrian stepped onto the stage alone. Dressed in a dark tailored suit, he thanked the audience for attending before addressing the rumors that had dominated headlines for weeks. He spoke first about Kensington Global's future, confirming that the company would continue strengthening its international partnerships while launching a comprehensive internal review of historic business practices. Then he paused. The silence inside the room became almost unbearable. Looking directly into the cameras, Adrian took a slow breath before saying something no one expected to hear. Several weeks ago, he began, I judged someone without knowing her story. I allowed first impressions to influence my character, and for that I owe a public apology. Reporters glanced at one another, confused by the sudden change in direction. Adrian continued, the woman I underestimated has shown more courage, honesty, and integrity than many people who have spent decades in positions of power. She deserves respect that should have been given from the very beginning. At that exact moment, the doors at the rear of the conference hall opened. Every camera turned simultaneously. Walking calmly through the center aisle was Ava Mitchell. She wore an elegant ivory gown that reflected quiet sophistication rather than extravagance. There were no dramatic gestures, no attempt to command attention, and no expression of triumph on her face. She simply walked with the same confidence she had displayed on the night of the charity gala when she first heard Adrian quietly say, "She's beautiful, just not my type." This time the room reacted very differently. The whispers stopped. Journalists lowered their voices. Executives who had once questioned her reputation stood in respectful silence. Adrian stepped forward to meet her, his expression carrying none of the certainty that had once been mistaken for pride. Instead, there was humility. Taking her hand before the assembled media, he spoke words that millions of viewers would remember for years. I was wrong, he said. I judged someone extraordinary before I understood who she truly was. Today I ask Ava Mitchell not because others expect it, not because it benefits my family or my company, but because I have come to respect the woman she has always been. The announcement that followed sent shockwaves through the nation. Adrian Kensington introduced Ava Mitchell as the woman he intended to marry. The reaction was immediate. Financial markets paused regular programming to cover the story. International news organizations interrupted scheduled broadcasts. Social media platforms exploded with discussions from viewers who remembered the rumors, the anonymous accusations, and the photographs that had questioned Ava's past. Many of the same people who had doubted her only weeks earlier now praised her composure and resilience. Executives who had quietly distanced themselves from her suddenly requested meetings. Political leaders sent congratulatory messages. Families that had once viewed her as an outsider now competed for invitations to the upcoming wedding. The transformation was astonishing, but Ava herself remained unchanged. She accepted congratulations graciously while continuing to treat everyone with the same quiet respect she had shown before anyone knew her name. Adrian noticed that more than anyone, the attention had not changed her because she had never measured her worth by public approval. Among those watching the announcement were several individuals whose expressions revealed something entirely different from celebration. Members of the rival Honridge group recognized that Ava's growing influence threatened plans they had spent years carefully constructing. More troubling still, certain advisors connected to Adrian's own family understood that if Ava continued uncovering evidence linked to Daniel Mitchell's investigation, decades of hidden misconduct could finally be exposed. Behind closed doors, urgent phone calls began almost immediately. Confidential documents were moved from private archives. Legal teams assembled emergency meetings. Someone quietly instructed an associate to ensure the wedding never proceeded as planned. They believed creating public chaos would distract attention from the evidence Ava had spent years collecting. They underestimated how prepared she truly was. Weeks later, preparations for one of the most anticipated weddings in modern South Korean history were complete. Distinguished guests arrived from around the world. Diplomats, business leaders, philanthropists, and respected public figures gathered beneath magnificent floral displays inside a historic ceremonial venue overlooking the city skyline. Television helicopters circled overhead while millions watched live broadcasts across multiple countries. Adrian stood at the front of the ceremony waiting for Ava. reflecting on how one careless sentence at a charity gala had changed the direction of his entire life. Then the music began. Ava entered the ceremony with calm dignity, every step symbolizing a journey that had started long before anyone inside the venue had known her name. The guests rose in admiration. Even those who had once questioned her now applauded sincerely. For a brief moment, it appeared that every hardship, every rumor, and every betrayal had finally led to a peaceful ending. Then, just as the officiant prepared to begin the ceremony, the enormous doors at the back of the hall burst open. A team of investigators entered carrying sealed evidence boxes and official warrants. The lead investigator looked directly toward Adrian and Ava before speaking words that instantly silenced every conversation in the room. "This ceremony must stop," he announced. "We have obtained new evidence connected to a decades-old corporate conspiracy, and several people attending this wedding are directly involved." The celebration ended before a single vow could be spoken. The joyful atmosphere that had filled the wedding venue only moments earlier disappeared almost instantly. Conversations stopped in mid-sentence. Television cameras, expecting to capture the wedding of the year, instead recorded something no producer could have anticipated. The lead investigator walked slowly down the center aisle, accompanied by members of South Korea's Financial Crimes Bureau carrying sealed evidence boxes marked with official government insignias. Every guest watched in stunned silence. Some assumed there had been a misunderstanding. Others feared a security threat. But Adrian Kensington knew from the expression on the investigator's face that this was something far more serious. Beside him, Ava Mitchell remained remarkably calm. She neither panicked nor appeared surprised. She simply looked toward the investigators with the quiet composure that had carried her through every challenge since the night she first walked into the charity gala and overheard Adrian casually remark, "She's beautiful, just not my type." While the guests struggled to understand what was happening, Ava seemed to recognize that the moment she had spent years preparing for had finally arrived. The lead investigator approached the ceremony platform before addressing everyone inside the hall. "This investigation concerns an international corporate fraud operation spanning more than 2 decades, he announced. "Evidence recovered during the past several weeks confirms large-scale financial crimes involving forged contracts, manipulated acquisitions, hidden offshore accounts, and the deliberate destruction of legitimate businesses across multiple countries." The words echoed through the silent venue. Reporters immediately began broadcasting the announcement live. Millions of viewers around the world watched as the investigator continued reading the official statement. Several executives seated near the front exchanged anxious glances. Others lowered their heads without saying a word. Adrian slowly looked across the audience, realizing that people he had known his entire life suddenly appeared like strangers. Then came the name no one expected to hear: Richard Hawthorne. A wave of disbelief swept across the room. Richard Hawthorne had served as Kensington Global's chief financial officer for nearly 25 years. He was more than a senior executive. He had been one of Adrian's late father's closest advisors, a trusted mentor who had helped guide the company through economic crises, international expansions, and billion-dollar acquisitions. Adrian had sought his advice since childhood. Richard had attended family holidays, celebrated company milestones, and spoken publicly about integrity, loyalty, and responsible leadership. Few people inside the business world possessed a reputation as respected as his. The possibility that he could be involved in criminal activity seemed almost impossible to accept. Richard slowly stood from his seat, maintaining an expression of controlled confidence. "This is absurd," he said calmly. "There must be some mistake." The lead investigator looked directly at him before placing a thick binder on the ceremonial table. "There is no mistake." Inside the binder were thousands of pages collected over years of investigation. Bank transfers hidden through international shell corporations, forged board resolutions, altered acquisition agreements, confidential emails using encrypted communication channels, secret ownership records connecting Richard Hawthorne to companies that had quietly profited whenever legitimate businesses collapsed. Every document had been independently verified. Every financial transaction formed part of a pattern stretching back more than 20 years. Adrian's hands remained motionless as he stared at the evidence. The man who had taught him that honesty was the foundation of leadership had secretly built his fortune through deception. The investigator continued. Evidence also confirms the deliberate manipulation of international partnerships through fabricated financial reports, falsified translations, and forged legal documents. A hush swept through the audience once again. The method sounded painfully familiar. Suddenly, every unanswered question surrounding Daniel Mitchell's downfall began fitting together. The destroyed consulting firm, the anonymous accusations, the disappearing contracts, the financial pressure, the ruined reputation. None of it had happened by chance. It had all been carefully orchestrated. Richard Hawthorne had quietly protected a criminal network while presenting himself as one of the country's most respected executives. Adrian closed his eyes for a brief moment. Every lesson Richard had taught him suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. Meanwhile, reporters noticed something extraordinary. Ava Mitchell wasn't reacting with satisfaction. There was no celebration on her face, no expression of revenge, only quiet determination. The lead investigator turned toward her. "Ms. Mitchell," he said respectfully, "would you please explain how this investigation reached today's conclusion?" The entire room shifted its attention toward Ava. She stepped forward slowly, her voice calm and steady. "For many years," she began, "people assumed my family lost everything because my father made mistakes." She paused. The truth was very different. She explained how Daniel Mitchell had uncovered irregular financial transfers while auditing multinational acquisitions decades earlier. He believed the discrepancies resulted from accounting errors. Instead, he had discovered an organized system designed to move enormous amounts of money through complex corporate structures that concealed the identities of those benefiting. When Daniel refused to remain silent, his credibility became the target. His clients disappeared. His company collapsed. His warnings were dismissed. History remembered him as a businessman who failed. But history had never seen the evidence. Ava looked toward Richard Hawthorne. "My father told me that one day the documents would speak louder than the lies." She gently placed several encrypted storage devices onto the investigator's table. "For 15 years," she continued, "I quietly collected those documents." The audience listened without moving. She described working across Europe, North America, and Asia, accepting positions that allowed her to lawfully access public corporate archives, historical acquisition records, and international regulatory filings. Every assignment taught her something new. Every country revealed another missing piece. Every financial statement connected another company. Every witness filled another gap. She never rushed. She never announced what she was doing. She understood that exposing powerful people required undeniable proof rather than accusations. By the time she returned to South Korea, she already possessed thousands of documents. The charity gala had never been the beginning of her mission. It had simply been the moment fate unexpectedly placed Adrian Kensington into a story that had begun decades earlier. The investigators carefully reviewed the additional evidence. Within minutes, forensic accountants confirmed that Ava's records matched government findings almost perfectly. The documents completed the final gaps in the investigation. There was nothing left to dispute. Richard Hawthorne looked around the room, searching for familiar faces. No one spoke. Executives who had defended him moments earlier quietly stepped away. Board members lowered their eyes. Even longtime friends avoided looking in his direction. The years of carefully constructed respect collapsed in complete silence. The lead investigator folded the arrest warrant. "Richard Hawthorne," he announced, "you are under arrest for financial fraud, corporate sabotage, conspiracy, forgery, obstruction of justice, and participation in an international criminal enterprise." As officers stepped forward, the room remained completely still. The applause that followed did not celebrate a downfall. It celebrated the beginning of accountability. For Adrian Kensington, the betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss. He had discovered that the greatest threat to his family's legacy had never come from competitors outside the company. It had been sitting in the boardroom beside him for decades. And for Ava Mitchell, the promise she had made to her father years earlier had finally begun to be fulfilled. Justice had not arrived through anger. It had arrived through patience, truth, and evidence that no lie could survive. The wedding that was supposed to unite two lives ended up exposing one of the largest corporate conspiracies in modern business history. Within days of Richard Hawthorne's arrest, investigators across several countries executed coordinated search warrants against companies connected to the fraud network. Financial records hidden inside offshore corporations were recovered. Shell companies that had existed only to move stolen money quietly disappeared as authorities froze billions of dollars in assets. Executives who had spent years believing their influence placed them above the law suddenly found themselves answering difficult questions before prosecutors instead of shareholders. Every forged signature, every manipulated contract, every fraudulent acquisition, and every business that had been deliberately destroyed was carefully reconstructed through thousands of documents collected over decades. What had once appeared to be isolated corporate failures was finally revealed as one carefully organized scheme stretching across continents. The network that had operated quietly for more than 20 years didn't collapse because someone made a mistake. It collapsed because one woman refused to stop searching for the truth, even when almost everyone believed the past should remain buried forever. For Adrian Kensington, the investigation forced him to confront a truth far more painful than any financial loss. His family's company survived, but the image he had carried of perfection did not. As independent directors restructured Kensington Global and new ethical safeguards were introduced throughout the organization, Adrian spent countless hours reflecting on the night everything had begun. Again and again, his mind returned to that charity gala in Seoul, the elegant ballroom, the laughter of distinguished guests, the confident young black woman walking quietly through the entrance, and the careless words that left his own mouth without a second thought. "She's beautiful, just not my type." At the time, they had seemed harmless. They lasted only a few seconds. Yet those few seconds almost caused him to overlook the most remarkable person he would ever meet. Looking back, Adrian realized that his greatest mistake had never been trusting Richard Hawthorne. It had been believing that appearances could reveal someone's character. The woman he had underestimated possessed more courage than many of the powerful executives he had admired for years. She never sought attention, never demanded recognition, and never used her intelligence to humiliate those who doubted her. Instead, she quietly changed lives through patience, integrity, and unwavering determination. Standing before the employees of Kensington Global during a company-wide address, Adrian spoke from the heart. "Leadership isn't measured by how quickly we judge people," he said. "It's measured by how willing we are to admit when we were wrong." Those words earned more respect than any business achievement of his career. For Ava Mitchell, justice brought something she had not expected: peace. For years, she had carried the memory of watching her father, Daniel Mitchell, lose everything after refusing to stay silent in the face of corruption. She remembered the sleepless nights, the financial hardship, the whispered accusations, and the lonely decision to leave the country while still carrying unanswered questions. Every success she achieved overseas had been driven by one promise she made to herself. Someday, the truth would matter more than power. Now, standing at her father's grave after the investigation concluded, she finally understood what he had tried to teach her all those years earlier. Revenge might satisfy anger for a moment, but truth has the power to restore generations. She placed a single white flower beside his headstone and quietly thanked him for teaching her that integrity is worth protecting, even when the cost seems impossible to bear. She could have celebrated the downfall of those responsible. She could have spoken publicly about every betrayal. She could have allowed bitterness to define the ending of her story. Instead, Ava chose forgiveness. Not because the crimes deserved forgiveness, but because she refused to allow the people who had stolen so much from her family to steal her future as well. Forgiveness became the final victory they could never take away. As the months passed, something extraordinary began happening. Families once divided by suspicion slowly found common ground. The Kensington family formally acknowledged the harm caused by trusted individuals who had abused their influence decades earlier. They met privately with members of the Mitchell family, not to erase history, but to accept responsibility for the failures that had allowed corruption to flourish. Those conversations were difficult. Some tears were shed. Painful memories resurfaced. But genuine reconciliation began where denial finally ended. Together, Adrian and Ava established an international foundation dedicated to corporate transparency, ethical leadership, and protecting whistleblowers who risk everything to expose wrongdoing. Young entrepreneurs, investigators, and business students from around the world soon looked to their story as proof that honesty could still prevail over influence. The foundation became more than a charitable organization. It became a living reminder that one courageous decision can inspire countless others to choose integrity instead of convenience. Years later, when people looked back on the story that had first captured international headlines, many remembered the dramatic arrests, the shocking revelations, and the billionaire wedding interrupted by investigators. But those who understood the story most deeply remembered something much simpler. They remembered a quiet moment inside a luxury ballroom when almost everyone reached the wrong conclusion about a woman they had never met. They remembered how quickly appearances created assumptions. They remembered how one careless sentence almost changed the course of several lives forever. And perhaps that became the greatest lesson of all. Because real strength rarely announces itself. It doesn't need the loudest voice in the room. It doesn't demand applause or recognition. It simply continues doing what is right, even when nobody notices. Sometimes the strongest people never announce their strength. Sometimes the kindest hearts remain hidden behind quiet smiles. And sometimes the person everyone ignores becomes the one history remembers. Before we say goodbye, we'd like to leave you with one final question. If you had been standing inside that ballroom on the night Adrian Kensington quietly looked at Ava Mitchell and said, "She's beautiful, just not my type," would you have judged her the same way everyone else did? Would you have seen only what was on the surface? Or would you have looked beyond appearances and recognized the quiet confidence of someone carrying a story no one else could see? Do you believe a single first impression can change someone's entire future? Have you ever been underestimated, or perhaps realized too late that you had underestimated someone else? We genuinely love to hear your thoughts, so share your answer in the comments below. Your perspective might encourage someone else who has experienced the same thing. And if you enjoy powerful stories filled with unexpected heroes, family secrets, emotional journeys, unforgettable romance, and shocking twists that reveal deeper truths about life, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We bring you new cinematic stories every week, each one designed to keep you thinking long after the final scene. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of this community. Until next time, remember that the greatest strength is often found in the people the world overlooks. The greatest victories belong to those who never stop believing in the truth, and sometimes, the person everyone ignores becomes the one who changes everything. Because the next story may change the way you see people forever.